Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Walsh. I am with Penn State Extension, and I am a spotted lanternfly researcher for Penn State. Work out of Berks County, Pennsylvania. This is where spotted lanternfly started. I came to Penn State after having run my own plant healthcare business for quite a number of years, and took this position to continue on with the lanternfly research. And really today, what I'm going to talk about is what we're starting to see in trends. This is a new insect in a new environment, and it first got here in 2014, and we're really starting to understand and see some trends now that really make a big difference in how we're going to approach and how we're going to treat this insect. A lot of the things that were thought early on have turned out to not be true. We've learned some new things that are definitely true that were not suspected. So first and foremost, Penn State, we are a non-discriminatory organization, and we do our best. If you have any complaints about discrimination, you have the right to reach out and let us know that. So what it is, spotted lanternfly, like Hormidel catula, first described by a gentleman named White in about the 1840s in Asia. It's native to Asia. In 2014, it was brought in accidentally, probably as an egg mass on packing material or on a product, and probably went unnoticed for several years before they found it, discovered it, and that gave the time for the population to build up a little bit. It's native to China, Indonesia, and Vietnam. The feeding of this, it's a plant hopper, it's a phloem feeder, piercing, sucking mouth parts, and it takes that phloem right out of just underneath the bark. So it's important to understand that, and I'll explain why, but it probably went unnoticed for several years. But you can see the discovery in 2014, and then the orange out in 2015, and then 2016, and then in 2017 they went to a county-wide quarantine level. And this doesn't mean that it wasn't over into New Jersey yet. It's just the edge of the Pennsylvania border, and it had no problem crossing the Delaware River when it got there. And as that spread out, the original concept was that it couldn't fly really at all. It was a hop and glide like a grasshopper. That is absolutely not true. If you take those, if you take the expansion over time and you look out to 2020, I would say that this circle here is probably the natural expansion of this insect. And when you look out at these other areas, those big leaps, that's where human assisted definitely had a big part in its movement. All those purple dots on there are discoveries of lanternflies, but not with a breeding population present. And so you can see December 2020, it's made it out pretty far. And then we get the update for March 2022. We've got populations in Massachusetts, right across Long Island, up into New York State, Ohio, Indiana. This was one where some folks moved from Berks County, Pennsylvania a few years ago, and they took their camper with them, and it looks like it may have had egg masses on it. And so at least they knew what they were looking at when they found the lanternflies, but it was probably a couple of years before it really got noticed. And all the way down here, we're down into Virginia, right on the North Carolina border. So it is an insect that is incredibly good at hitchhiking, and that makes it very problematic. All life stages are good at hitchhiking. It is univoltine, one life cycle per year, which makes it pretty easy to determine. I shouldn't say easy. It makes it very uniform in how you're going to approach treatment. And you know that you're going to see pretty much consistency to the life stages at any given time. The first stage, what we call the first stage, the egg masses, that is late in the fall. It overwinters. They hatch out now through the springtime. In the first 3 instars, it goes through 3 hatches with the black with the white spots. They are plant hoppers. You go to touch them and they'll fling away, even at the earliest size, less than a 1/4 inch. The 4th instar is when it gets this red coloring to its shell, and that's when they really start to get noticeable. People notice that something's wrong. A lot of times you'll have customers or clients that will see these first instars and think they're fleas or spiders or something like that. And but they're small, they're not real big, they're not real offensive at that point. And then we get to the adult stage, and the adult stage is really nothing too close to it in our Pennsylvania environments. Going across the country, you may have some insects that look more closely like this. We don't, and we often see that coloring with the hind wings displayed with that bright red in pictures, but most of the time that you're going to see them, they're going to look like this on a tree, and they blend in incredibly well. They're very difficult to see in small numbers, and I say it's Univoltine. That's where there's a killing freeze. Without a killing freeze in the fall, we don't know. As it gets down to coastal North Carolina, it may be that they go quite well through the whole season. We just don't know at this point. And that could be problematic. It'll make it more difficult to treat. You won't have that uniformity of what life stage is going at any given time. And so we will see as it gets there. The eggs are laid in the fall, as I said, compared to the size of a penny. This has a typical egg mass. You can see that there's eggs that are laid, and then there's what was thought to be waxy covering, which is actually a protein that's used to cover them up. We think that helps protect them and keep them from desiccating through the winter. Very thin. You can see the thickness there. These are the eggs laid out in the picture. Nice, clean rows, straight rows. And then the female will go back and cover with that covering, which then fades back to that brownish grayish color afterwards. These are very, very well camouflaged, adapted to be missed by sight, and they can be very difficult to see right in front of your face, and take some practice to get used to. And we really would love to be able to have a great treatment, a very good treatment, an effective treatment for eggs, because eggs are the only time of the life cycle that these insects are not in motion. Unfortunately, from some of the work that we did, you can see from two different studies here, you can see that 0 to 3 meters, 3 to 6 meters, 6 to 9 meters off the ground, the majority of the eggs are going to be laid more than 6 meters off the ground. And 6 meters being roughly 19 feet, that's higher than you're going to see with your naked eye effectively and consistently. And it also, in terms of smushing and squishing and everything, it's very difficult to do and get consistent control. If you see an egg mass, squish it. If you're in an area where it's not yet been reported, absolutely get in touch with your local extension, your local state agency, regulatory agency. Let them know if you're in a new area that you found it. If you are in Pennsylvania, just squish the eggs and move on. One of the unique things about spotted lanternfly is they are not real fussy about where they lay their eggs. They will lay on trees that they don't feed on, such as conifers. They generally just won't feed on a conifer, but they're more than happy to lay their eggs there. Tiny little twigs, man-made materials, they will lay their eggs just about anywhere. Where I was at this morning, I was looking at them. They were egg masses laid up the side of a rock face, right tucked into the moss. And any openings in the moss, there was egg masses. So they're not real fussy about where, which makes it also very difficult, not just on their host plants. And so we went out and we did some trials where it's different materials, and we applied those materials at different times of the year, hoping to get different control, better control. If we applied earlier in the fall, we could desiccate them with the oils. I should point out 50% golden oil. That's a soybean oil made by a company called Stoller's, and it's approved as a 50% rate for treating spongy moth eggs. And so it was tried out by some folks at USDA and was very effective against spotted lanternfly eggs as well. The difficulty in that is, and I'll show you in a little bit, is at that rate, there's some serious drawbacks to broad spread application. We use regular 3% oil, 5%, which we took it up a little bit over the label rate just to see if we get a better control. Then we use insecticidal soap. As I said, that waxy covering isn't wax, it's a protein, and the soap actually breaks it down very quickly right in front of your eyes. And we did that, and we'd also used the soap applied in December, and then followed it up with December and March, followed by oil on top of it, thinking that we could break down the coverings a little bit and get better control. And so where we did all these trials, it was a lot of eggs, a lot of egg masses, and we did it in 3 locations. And what we see, we have our control rate here, a proportion of eggs hatching, roughly about 60% hatch naturally. The ones with the asterisks here are ones that were statistically different from the control. And we saw that our 4% soap actually was statistically different and when it was applied in December. So maybe there's something there, except for the fact that we look at the 4% soap followed by oil in April did worse than the control. So I would say this is a fluke, and if anything, should be reinvestigated, but probably just a little bit of a fluke there. And one of the things that is really frustrating about this insect, when we look at the outcome of these treatment options, it is remarkable how inconsistent this insect keeps making, keeps proving us to be. So if we understand that what all these mean as averages, this graph is done by Dr. Joe Keller at Penn State, and he took all those results, and each one of these circles represents a different egg mass in the treatments. The bigger the circle, the more eggs that were in that mass. And so you can see, even though we got better control, statistically different control with that golden oil at 50%, we still had some of those egg masses had 100% hatch, and a good number of them had more than 50% hatch. And that's pretty consistent across the board. And we had every single treatment pretty much had at least one egg mass with 0% hatch. So that variability makes it very difficult to go out and try and do the Ovicide treatments as a control strategy. We say you can get up to about 70% control with your standard oils, but it's not consistent. And if you're going to do those kind of treatments, you have to let your customer know that it's not going to be a end all be all for those eggs. They're still going to have hatch. And so we took that away from further out from doing the hand sprayed trials, and we took that up to using hydraulic gun, truck mounted rig. And we sprayed egg masses at one location in Lehigh County, and we wanted to see how it would do as a whole tree rate, as an arborist would actually do. And lo and behold, we got our golden oil only up to about 28%. And the reason that we only got to 28% was with the bypass pump running. When you get that much oil rate into water, it starts to emulsify. And we made a milkshake. It didn't quite make mayonnaise, but I think if we added much more oil, it would have been. And you can see that at the lower standard oil rates, the golden oil was no better. We did a little bit better with our paraffinic based oils, and it was pretty good. But again, what does that mean when you look at the individual egg masses? There was plenty of egg masses that had 100% hatch, and plenty of them that had 0. So it's a lot of inconsistency. You can see that golden oil actually did pretty good at 28%, but we have to be really careful with that, because what we did was nuke the tree. When those leaf buds came out, you can see about the line here where the spray got up to. When you look at you can see the seeds came out, and then the leaves were nuked after that. The other major drawback to that golden oil at 50%, it was about 35-foot maple trees. When you do the math out, 5 gallons of oil to use 10 gallons of mix, the cost on that, a little bit of applicator cost, $475.90 as a rough estimate for what a whole tree application is with that golden oil. So you got phytotoxic concerns, and it's very expensive. So we don't really recommend that you go out and treat your customers' trees at that rate. I will say that you can go out and use 50%. You can hand squirt it on. You can use a paintbrush if you so desire. It's very effective. my feeling is if you can reach it, might as well just squish them. So we didn't do so good with our Ovicide trials. We have a couple more running right now that we're trying some different things, but so far we don't have a great winter. You can get up to about 70% control, but do not expect that consistently, and to make sure your customer knows that. So the egg hatch starts in May. It's going on right now through Pennsylvania. Those egg masses, 30 to 50 eggs. Individual egg masses will hatch out over time. They don't all hatch on the same day, and sometimes it spreads over 2 weeks. There's a little bit of increased hatch success rate with a chill period, but it's not necessary. So when we talk about into North Carolina on south and into the deeper south, they will hatch without having a chill period. So as far as going north, what temperature kills eggs, we're not sure, but we think it has to be really, really cold. Here's a nice picture. This is a nymph just emerging from the egg mass, and it doesn't take long for them to sculpturize and gain their color, and they're off and running in a couple hours. Watch for predators if you're out spraying. We're starting to see a lot of is the wheel bug, the assassin bug eggs being deposited where spotted lanternfly eggs are laid. These are all spotted lanternfly eggs. You can see there's old ones from the previous year. We have new ones that have the exuvia from the hatch. We call it the ripcord when we're looking, and that's usually goes away within about a week or so. We see that little white tag disappear, but you know it's fresh hatch, fresh eggs at that point. And as you zoom in, like I said, you see the wheel bugs, you see wheel bug eggs, you can see a couple of nymphs that didn't make it, but it's just a whole hodgepodge. What those wheel bugs do when they hatch out of their eggs, they will go right after the spotted lanternfly. So we're seeing all stages of those wheel bugs, the assassin bugs, going right after spotted lanternflies. Looks like they're swarming over this egg mass as it hatches, which is pretty cool. And right up through the adult stages, they're mirroring them pretty well. You can see the proboscis right in the side of the lanternfly drinking a juice box. So that's pretty cool. Would encourage you, if you go out to treat, try not to be too heavy-handed with the broad spectrum bifenthrins and the other synthetic pyrethroids like that. Try not to do more damage if you have a lower population of lanternflies. Understand that there are predators that are picking up with them, and try not to do more damage than good with your treatments. Now, the first Instars, second Instars, third Instars, they like to feed on all kinds of tender plants, anything that's lush, that's got a lot of juice flow, it's soft. They will be all over it. Roses are an absolute great indicator. If you have roses on a property, check for roses, but they're really not fussy. They'll feed on just about anything. And so where we are in this as an update in Pennsylvania in 2022, we really need to start thinking about lanternflies as two very different concepts. One is the commercial applicators, the homeowners, the agriculture, and the government treatment program is a very different idea. We need to decouple that concept of private applicators being part of an eradication program. It's definitely a good thing if you can kill lanternflies, but please make sure that you're not doing more harm than good. They're here to stay in Pennsylvania. We don't see eradication on the table at all anymore. And as you saw with the number of counties under quarantine, it's important that we don't move it around, move it further and faster than it could get normally. And if you can kill them, good, but we need to get it into our customers' minds that their actions are going to be very local in their effect and impact, and that they're not going to be a part of trying to, quote, eradicate or control the population. That's left to the government agencies at this point. And researchers are still working. We're still working at ways to do it, but we really want to stress that people should not be trying to eradicate this themselves at this point. Nuisance reduction, if you have a property that's loaded up and it makes it unusable, if you have a venue that's doing weddings, things like that, yes, it is a good thing to treat and make sure you don't lose your commercial viability. But when it comes down to it, for the most part, we do not see plants being killed by this insect. We see, aside from the Ailanthus altissima, which in and of itself is an invasive plant, we are just not seeing big populations of trees being killed. And therefore we can exhale a little bit. It's not the doom and gloom that we originally worried about with the introduction of this insect. There are very serious concerns for the grape industry. There are serious concerns for export industries, more because of quarantine issues, but we're not seeing our vegetation killed. And so, you know, where is this thriving? Where is it really living at? Where are we seeing it? In our natural forests, the big open unmanaged natural forests, we're not seeing lanternfly really getting a foothold there. It's just not, it's not getting established. It's not doing damage there. Agricultural crop landscapes, anything that's managed, monocultured stuff, everything that gets sprayed, we're not seeing it killed. We're not seeing big impacts there in the agricultural world, aside from grapes. Where we do see it a lot is these unmanaged right-of-ways, suburban landscapes, urban landscapes, and that intertie in between those unmanaged right-of-ways, natural areas, and the urban landscapes. That's really where we see lanternfly really making its biggest impacts and footholds. And if you look at that as one big scene, they are doing this entire area in their life cycle. They're moving through it. We look at that urban managed area. We look at the croplands, the unmanaged areas on the fence rows, and lanternflies are moving freely right through them and taking advantage of different micro ecosystems that are offered within that. And so in this particular property, there's 50 red maples there we've been studying for several years. And we know that the eggs are laid on these maples in the fall every year. And when we go back to look in the spring, sometimes we can't find the hatched eggs on these trees, but we look back in the viburnum and there they are eating on that new growth. And so the question comes for treatment, you know, is it worth it to treat that maple early in the spring, knowing that the nymphs are venturing off and moving out and spreading out? That's a question that you have to work out with your customer. Is it worthwhile? As it goes for hitchhiking, here's my truck parked off those 50 trees, and right off in this little driveway here, that's my truck, and there are nymphs crawling all over it. And the question is, where are they going? Where are they going away from the trees and even out into that wheat field? They'll find stalks. They're happy with weeds. They'll bite and pierce into anything that has phloem, and they're happy to take it and move along. This was a study that was done a few years ago with Dr. Kelly Hoover, and these nymphs were rolled in fluorescent dye powder, released, and then went back at night with ultraviolet lasers, and they light up like Christmas tree bulbs. And so just to see how far they went, it's pretty significant. However, you can see in this video that the dye powder kind of clogs them up. They don't walk so fast. And so it may have been a little bit artificially low with the dye powder, but 65 meters, 10 days post-release. So for something that's a 1/4 inch big, can't fly, to go 65 meters in 10 days, these things are in motion. They're in motion. We see them, the distance from a release point over time, they are constantly in motion. And when we get up to the 4th Instars is when we start seeing them really come together in groups, aggregating and congregating. And that's when they start doing the kind of damage that is a little bit more visible because they're stressing those branches and trees out. We also see that big break for the Ailanthus altissima, the tree of heaven, and black walnut. We see that they're kind of equally preferred in that 4th instar early adult stage. If you don't have Ailanthus, they're going to be on black walnut if it's available. But the really important thing to understand about lanternflies is they will feed on what's available, and if they don't like what they find, they'll just move along. And so don't think that just because you don't have Atlantis on a site or you don't have black walnut on a site that they're not going to be there. They may find something else in the interim and move along. They may stay. That population is in motion. It shifts a lot, and what they're feeding on a given site is going to be determined by what's available. They can host on over 70 different plants in Pennsylvania, and they're happy to do so. And then the fourth Instars, they turn into adults with wings. We generally see that at the end of July. And you can see male adults have the black valve fur on the end of the abdomen, and the females have the dark red and maroon. And so easy to figure out male or female once they're adults. The males are generally a little bit smaller, about an inch. The females are about an inch and a quarter, and they swell up with eggs. And you can see the piercing sucking mouth part there, the phloem feeders. They're using stylets to get into air openings in the twigs, in the bark, using existing openings, and that's how they're feeding. So it's not actually drilling. You won't find any kind of sawdust, frass, anything like that. They're using existing openings. They insert their stylets in there and start feeding on the phloem. And so at that site in Topton, that I was showing you with the 50 red maples, to reinforce that population fluctuation, what we count in the first 8 foot up and 8 foot out of the trunk of the tree, and as first instars especially because they're so tiny to see. You can see in June in 2020 we were over 1,400 counted on those 50 trees. In July, they're pretty much gone, and they were just gone. We went out looking. We looked through our black walnuts, all the black walnuts down along that fence row. We could find some, but not tremendous amounts. And then when we looked at that, we kept going week after week, and by August they start to tick up again. We started seeing these adults come in, and then at the end of September we saw this spike rise up, and when we went above the 8x8, because you can see the adults high up into the trees there, you can see across those 50 trees we counted 12,000. So if you're doing this as a control for a customer, and you have a whole lot of nymphs and then nothing on a property until one massive spike at the end, it's very difficult to plan your treatments. It's very difficult to react that fast for all your customers. In this site, we saw that jump go from 509 to over 16,000 adults across those 50 trees, but we also killed 9,500 because it was an insecticide trial site. So roughly 26,000 was the jump across those trees. And so that's freak out time for a lot of customers. And what's really more amazing is we see that right at that equinox, right when they came back into those maples, is when we saw our egg deposition. And these are the number of eggs that were definitely laid in the first 8 feet. We marked them with lumber crayons so we don't double count them to the next week. And what we see is those numbers of eggs come in right in October, and then the freeze in November. It's a very difficult time to try and treat when they only showed up at the end of September and laid all their eggs for the following season through October. And keep in mind those trees are beginning to senesce, so you're not getting good uptake, good flow of, if you're going to do an injection, it's more difficult at that time to get material to move up. And so we went back to that site in 2021, and what we can see is that we started off with similar numbers of nymphs, probably a little bit lower, but what we saw was flat until the end of September and a little bit of adult activity, but we came nowhere near where we were in 2020 with the adults. And so this site, for all intents and purposes, looks like the population dropped drastically from one year to the next. But we did see that same trend again, where we just didn't have them present through most of the summer. However, when we look at the egg mass deposition there from 2020 to 2021, despite the fact that there was 10,000 bugs fewer seen week over week, our egg deposition was not that different. And so that is a concern. And I can tell you that the population is fairly healthy out there this year. We're studying it again, tracking it. This is another site we've been watching in middle of Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. And you can see in 2021 here with this red line, the number of nymphs was very high. It dropped out down to almost nothing. We saw our adult spike in early August and then flatlined and never came in like they had the year before with the blue line. So we did not get the return on this particular site. And so when we look at the egg masses that were laid from year over year, 2021, there was barely any eggs that we counted. And that's indicated this year with what we see in nymphs. So there can be a lot of fluctuation year to year, a lot of fluctuation through a season, and a lot of fluctuation from one site to the next site. The questions that we don't understand is why. The answers, we just don't understand the why. This is another site in Berks County, Pennsylvania, where we've been testing with passive traps and catching with passive traps that kill them. And you can see in 2019, our numbers, the blue lines being the males, the pinkish lines being the females. We can see that when they first get their wings in August, the numbers are sort of similar. This is where the study started in the first year at the end of August, so we don't have the earlier data. But you can see the numbers 3 years have consistently declined from 19 to 20 to 21. The lanternfly population has declined on this particular site. Why? We don't know. Does it mean it's gone? No, it doesn't. Can we predict any better what the host preference will be? This is a shopping center in central Montgomery County, Collegeville area. And we broke down the parking lot into different areas. And we went out and we identified all the different trees that were planted in this parking lot. And this is a very manipulated environment, certainly not representative of every tree and every plant that would be found out there in nature. But when we looked at all of them consistently, when we looked at the maple trees with the orange stars, that's where they were in the fall. And this is in October of 2020. And so this is lot D. This is what the actual numbers were there, so that we can see that there's a very strong preference for some plants. If you're going to treat, it makes sense to treat the plants that we think or we know that they're going to be on. When we go look at that entire shopping center and the parking lots that we looked at, overwhelmingly, the highest sum of lanternfly was on the maples out of these species that we looked at that were present on the site. And when we break that down to numbers per inch of DBH, it's not even close. Numbers per inch of DBH present on the site, it was maples all the way. They couldn't care less about the crab apples, the pears, the pin oaks, and so on. And when we went back down to there, and I'm sorry, so the question is there any edge effect where the lanternflies flew in and they encounter the first trees that they see, and that's why they were on certain ones? And the answer is no. When we looked across those lots, it was fairly consistent right through. So they moved through that shopping center to get to the trees that they like. And it's not just that it's the first ones that they encountered. There's that constant motion, constant movement. But when we go back and we looked in 2021, and the number that we counted in 2020 was 4,768 across all the maples in 2020. We only counted a whole whopping 146 insects in 2021. And that is a drastic reduction, just absolutely massive reduction. But then again, when we look at the number of eggs laid, it was only half as many eggs. So the question is, are they going to tick back up? And that's the site we're following again this year. Population fluctuations, I've heard a lot of folks in our area say that they are gone, that they have not seen them as bad as they had in the original couple of years after introduction. And I would say that across the multiple sites and multiple years, we have seen reduction in some of these areas. As a percentage fewer across these 4 study sites that I showed you, anywhere from 75 to 97% fewer. And so that starts to make us get a little bit excited that maybe this thing is going to burn itself out. However, from that site where the pole traps were, a whopping 3.6 miles away, was a new site that we started last year. And this was the volume of honeydew that was falling out of those trees. That is lanternfly urine dropping, and it was massive. And so just a few miles can make a big difference. I think the best comparison I have for this right now is a bit like Japanese beetles, where you can see populations fluctuate up and down year to year. Just a few short miles difference can be a major difference in what the population looks like. As all that honeydew comes down, it becomes a substrate for growing sooty mold. And this section of woods, until the end of the season, it looked like a forest fire had gone through it, and it was pretty much trashed. Problems for understories, problems for decks, problems for agriculture. Sooty mold on grapes is not a good thing. On crops is not a good thing. And we see a lot of increased activity of stinging insects like the European hornets. And we've also seen what looks to be some kind of damage down into the xylem of the some of the branches that have been fed upon of certain trees, certain species. Is lanternfly killing trees? No, it's a stressor. The sooty mold blocks photosynthesis, the nutrient loss can kill limbs and weaken the plants. That might open it to something else, ambrosia beetles, something like that. But we're not seeing them killed outright. But you can see the amount of nutrient loss from heavy feeding in individual branches. Like I said, sooty mold, the nuisance factor for this is massive. If you have a customer who has a deck or a patio or something like that underneath a tree that's being heavily fed upon, then it's a good time to treat and do what you can for the customer. The stinging insects, definitely a problem. If you have a customer who's allergic to bee stings, it's a problem. As I keep saying, for grapes are absolutely a concern. Lanternflies will go after grape and will go after ailanthus until they're dead. Not too many other species that will do that. Apples and peaches are not preferred hosts, and a standard regimen of spraying in an orchard for tree fruits will deal with lanternfly just fine. The forest product industry, as I said, for the quarantine concerns, in Pennsylvania, it's a big industry. It's a $16.7 billion industry. Our nursery and landscape industry is $944 million. As I showed you the picture on egg masses on nursery pots, the fact that the individuals who are shipping have to inspect every plant and certify that it is free of lanternflies is a lot of extra time and labor, and it's a hardship for those growers. It's a hardship for the people that have to ship. It's a hardship for grape growers, and so we want to do our best to not move it accidentally to where it's not yet, and that means doing your part to make sure your vehicles are clean of it, that you don't take it with you accidentally. For Pennsylvania hardwoods, I shudder to think what it would mean if the European Union put in a quarantine on U.S. hardwoods because of lanternfly or Pennsylvania hardwoods. We are the #1 exporter of hardwoods in the U.S., and it would be just an absolute rippling through our economy, and a lot of small towns and all the associated industry would be absolutely devastated by something like that. Lanternfly are capable of hanging on. They have an aurelia pad and a tarsal claw, and they're good at hiding. And we don't have any silver bullets to knock things down, but we think that with early detection of a population, we can knock it back if it's treated immediately. So for all the arborists and all the people out there looking at trees in areas where it's not yet, keep an eye open for it. And if you find it, report it. As I said, can it fly? Yes, it can fly. At that site in Topton with the 50 red maples, we watch them crossing that quarter mile, no problem. This is a quarry site near where I live, And this is 4/10 of a mile. We've seen them clearing that quarry pit. I know they didn't fly up out of the bottom, and they've cleared the asphalt tower with 50 feet to spare. And so they can fly. It tends to be in the fall on warm days when they get good thermals to rise on, and they're not agile like a dragonfly or anything like that. But a couple of these kind of flights combined make a pretty big jump. And my personal belief, about 7.5 miles per year is an individual's capability of natural spread. And there's a study out of Purdue that is indicated that 9.5 is what they have been doing. We don't know if that's natural or human assisted. So what should you do? Make informed decisions. The extension website for Penn State, psu.edu. You can go right on there, click on the banner for Stop the Invasive Lanternfly. There's all kinds of good information there, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And we have our management guide out there that has a lot of good updates for what you can use in terms of the chemical controls. If you're going to use insecticides, the decisions that you make to use the insecticides, is it necessary? And really, you have to ask yourself at this point, what are you trying to accomplish, and is it in the best interest of your customer? And really don't want to make this worse by just absolutely rampant insecticide use where it's not having much impact. If you have a couple lanternflies and the trees are fine, maybe the best thing you can say to your customer is don't worry about it. If you have a tree that is absolutely dripping and crawling, then it's probably time to treat. And so your time of the year is going to be a very big determining factor of which insecticide you reach for. If you have the time to get the treatment in there, then you can use some of your systemics. If you don't have the time and you need a quick knockdown, then you might have to go with your fast-acting contacts like the bifenthrins or the beta-cyfluthrins. And so it's all a matter of what the individual needs are for the property that you're working on. So with that, I have to thank a whole lot of people that make a lot of this research happen. And like I said, the predators that are coming alive and I shouldn't say coming alive, that are starting to kind of catch up with this are pretty impressive. And they may be a factor in why we see some reduced numbers in some areas, but certainly not the only factor. So with that, take any questions.